Okay, welcome everyone. At this time, we'll go ahead and get started. So, you are in the Culturally Responsive Instruction for Native American Students session with David Sullivan. We are so pleased to have David Sullivan with us today to share his expertise. And throughout the session, we will stop and take questions. So, if at any point you think of a question that pops into your head, please put it in the chat so that we can answer your questions throughout. Thank you very much and welcome.
Good afternoon. This is David Sullivan. As she said, I am so honored to be a part of this session. I was very humbled when I was asked to share experiences from my part of the country, my area where I grew up here in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and I just hope that what I share today provides a little bit more of helpful information for you, helpful insight into experiences that we've had here. As far as the content of the slides, I consider that more structural frameworking for some of the elements that I'll be talking about. But the bulk of what I want to talk about is some of the experiences that we've had here over the course of time while I've been here. And so, as you know, thinking about the overall theme of this meeting, growing in sovereignty, I've really been thinking about how that relates to me and how that relates to the area that I grew up in. Let me just first introduce myself a little further. I'm David Sullivan. I'm Kiowa and Choctaw and Irish as well. I'm the oldest son of Ken and Brenda Sullivan, the oldest grandson of the late David and Louise Paddlety. And I come from a small community, not necessarily in Anadarko, but it's 7 miles west of Anadarko, called the Redstone Valley, the Redstone community. And it's one of the communities of 5 communities that the Kiowas formed over time once we were forcefully settled in this area. And so it's an area that I grew up in, and I realized that I grew up in a place of sovereignty. And I didn't fully realize that until later in life when I was in this position. And I was actually one day I was sitting here in the office with an elder. He's now passed on, but he was sharing with me about the community that I come from. And he said, you know, the Redstone community was one of the Kiowa communities that kept our traditions and our culture and our, you know, essentially our sovereignty alive by keeping us unique and keeping what made us who we are alive, because we had to put those into hiding in that little valley where I come from. There are places that we know of where the dances and the songs and the ceremonies and the things that we now were able to bring back in the open, they were kept there behind these bluffs. And there were people that, you know, they had lookout scouts that when they knew the army was coming, then they packed up and shut down. But when it was time to keep those traditions according to our calendar, we kept those. And so I was proud of that. I gained a new perspective and a new respect and love for the community that I come from. And it's not necessarily, like I said, it's not Anadarko per se, it's the Redstone community. And so I'm really appreciative of that and thankful that I can share a little bit of that with you. So my title is the Special Programs Director from the Anadarko Public Schools, and that is somewhat of a story as far as how that evolved. I initially started 23 years ago as the Title VI JOM coordinator, and I came from the University of Oklahoma prior to that. And I had experience working with the American Indian Institute. This is my home place. This is where I grew up. I graduated from here. So when this opportunity opened, I decided that I would take it with the intent of it being a temporary position, temporary time frame. But here I am at this point, and I still enjoy coming to work every day. And I don't know, I guess if that ever changes, then I will know it's time to make a different step, take a different step and move on from there. But what that entails now is not only the Title VI and JOM program, but also the special services or special education program. And then we have other programs that are in development in a kind of a reboot phase. We have a suicide prevention program, and then we have our program it's called Spark Wheel, but it used to be a communities and schools. It used to be under the communities and schools label. Still has the same model, but it just has a different name and a different structure now, but they still provide the same services for our students. So just to go over some of our objectives, we have three, and I always try to keep those limited. So we're just going to look at some foundations for CRI, or culturally responsive instruction. We're going to go over some initial guidelines for how it developed here primarily, and how we've fluctuated over time through different projects, different areas that we can look at that we've done, and then looking at some action steps, something that you can potentially take back, looking at if you have, I'm sure everyone has, if they really dig in and look, you have some form of CRI in development, or you're thinking of it in some way, shape, or form. So what I want to do is acknowledge from where I am in Anadarko. We are in Wichita land, Wichita and affiliated tribes. And so anytime I do a presentation, and whether it's I'm traveling, I still acknowledge the land that I come from, which is right now where the ancestral lands of our Wichita and affiliated tribes, which not only includes Anadarko, but also south into Texas and a little further north of here as well. And I'd also like to thank the Office of Indian Education, Julian Guerrero. I want to thank him and the Office of Indian Education, the team there, and Synergy Enterprises, because they really have helped me quite a bit. Doris Tinsley and her team, they've been extremely helpful in preparing for this presentation. And I'd also like to look at the contributions of our earlier generations. We often forget this when we're providing a presentation, and I wanted to bring this to the forefront, especially considering our topic. And I'm always reminded of my second great grandmother. She her Kiowa name was King Tuttle, and she was one of many strong Kiowa women that held our family together. And many people around here can trace their connections to her, but she really was just instrumental. And I gained a lot of strength from hearing stories through my grandfather, David Paddlety, sharing stories about her. There's one that I recalled where she recalled hiding behind tree roots that were they were exposed on the side of a dry riverbed, and she was hiding in the midst of these roots. And she could remember watching the soldiers on the horses chasing our people, chasing them around, gathering them up. Some were not being, they were being harmed. And so she was able to survive that. And, those echoes of resiliency, they connect us, and they strengthen us today. And it's important for us to remember those, because going down to the next bullet, the connection of our earlier generations to ourselves and our students, it's important for us as educators to connect to those stories. And I know some of you are here and you've done this, And then there are some of you that may not have thought of this, but I encourage you to make this a consistent habit in your educational experiences and your educational interactions with your students, to connect them to their, and however that can happen, to connect them to their earlier generations, the experiences that they had, and begin to go through and help them. Because going to the last bullet point, the power of those connections, it really it empowers them for success, learning, leadership, and life. So I just encourage you to make that a part of your daily practice. And I remember a story that I heard. It's a story that, well, since we're still technically somewhat in the wintertime, I can mention it. I won't tell the full story, but one of our characters in our tribe is called Sane Day. And there was a story that I had a chance to develop for one of our earlier projects connected to CRI, and it was about gaining knowledge. And the story was about the great mystery was coming. The cloud came down to Earth, and the great mystery was allowing people and animals to come in and ask one question to gain knowledge, to gain information. And through the course of the story, because he's a trickster, because he's always doing something to either create mischief, or he's doing something and he usually gets himself into trouble. He missed his chance. But what he did gain and he learned was that through the collective, through being able to go and ask the others what they learned or what they asked and learned, he was able to learn through that. So I want to encourage you to remember and value the power of connection. Remember and value the power of interaction and relationships, because that's going to take you very far in this process in terms of setting foundations for culturally responsive instruction. And I want to tell you, I don't consider myself an expert in this. I consider myself someone on a journey with you. I just want to share what I've experienced, and please don't consider me an expert in this at all. It's something that I've learned through experience, and I'm still learning every day. And I'll share more about that as well as we go through. So this slide here is: culture should not be understood as individual traits, but rather as the constellation of ways in which people think, act, and make sense of the world. And so I chose this. Some of these slides, which they're taken from a collective of several presentations, several projects that over the years that I've looked at and worked on with different partners, ranging from UCLA to AIR down in Austin. So these are areas that we've looked at and we've developed over time. And so some of these elements that I'm sharing with you, they're general somewhat, but they really worked well for us. They worked in terms of our context of what we have. Some of these may not fit with you, and that's what I encourage you to do is always work within the context of your community. And I'll share more of what I mean by that over the next few sections. But in terms of value, there are multiple strategies. And what I really want to talk to you in terms of values or in terms of strategies, I really want you to talk to you about a system. This is more of a development of a systemic way of thinking, a systemic way of operating, because you can have strategy, you can have a strategy that works for a time, and then it doesn't work because changes come to your community, changes come to within your organization. And so you're going to have a system. And so these are some of the values that you're going to need to, I should say that we rely on quite a bit in terms of going back when it's time to renew, when it's time to recalibrate, and it's time to reform a new strategy, so that helps us develop what we need in order to fit and meet the needs of our students at that time. Because as you know, as educators, the needs of your students change over time. The students change. Technology definitely changes so fast. And so you definitely need to be adaptive. And that's something that our tribes were always very adept at. You know, that's thinking back to that same elder that was telling me about my community. That's one thing he in that same conversation, he talked about. He said, our people are so resilient and we're so able to adapt. When you think about how much we've changed in the course of 50 years or 100 years back, we've gone from where we were to, you know, living in the plains and adapting to life and the systems there, to be able to adapt and live in the world that we live in today, where we have the technology that we have, and we have the multicultural systems that are always changing here in our area and on a global scale. And so the values, as you can see, having that sense of sharing, we've always had that sense of sharing. And I know that's not just for us here in our area, but that's a common thing. Looking at the collective over the individual, having that strong connection to our not just the earth, but our location. My strong connection is to Redstone, to that valley. And so it has, over time, that circle has grown. And I'll talk about place-based education more in other sections, but connections to a place, connection to earth, and having a different view of time. Not we can say cyclical, but I think it's even more complex than that. And I think that's a whole nother discussion that I won't get into, but also looking at extended family patterns and looking at being able to connect with our people on an extended scale. You know, as I mentioned before, my second great grandmother, you know, there are so many people that I know. And when I was younger, and my wife, I first brought my wife, she wasn't from this area, but I would bring her and I would tell her, oh, this is so and so, this is my cousin, and this is another person, this is my cousin. And she would look at me and she would say, how many cousins do you have? And I said, well, I have quite a few, because of how we all connect, and how back in the past, a certain ancestor had several wives, or, you know, it varied based on that situation. And so those are some of the things that we have in terms of the values that we connect, in terms of how we operate, and how we move into developing these programs and these systems that we're talking about. And then epistemology, that's a really cool word for a way of studying nature, and you know, the scope of knowledge that we're talking about. So in order to develop the CRI systems that we're talking about, you know, these elements, you know, they're valuable not only for the individual, but they're really valuable for the team in creating that system. You know, this doesn't develop in a vacuum. So, you know, being able to understand the ways of knowing within a people, it's important, not only for us individually, but for our teachers that come into our districts. You know, and in our district, we're a diverse district. We're not fully, you know, we're not just Native American and indigenous students. We have all, you know, all races in our population, as most of you, I'm assuming you do, unless you come from, you know, from a reservation school or of that nature. But in order to develop all these, you know, we have to look at interdependence of systems, connections to the natural world, interrelatedness to other beings, you know, looking at systems, you know, in terms of how we survived over the past. You know, we survived by understanding connections to the natural world. We understood how to operate on the plains, and how, you know, what we needed to know in terms of how the systems of the North worked. As if you are familiar with the Kiowa, we didn't stay in one location. We migrated and followed the migration patterns. We needed to be able to connect and understand weather patterns. We needed to understand medicinal locations. Where could we find certain things at certain times of the year? We needed to understand how to navigate and connect. and with sacred places, where safe zones and danger zones. We needed to know how to connect with other tribes and how to communicate and survive. And that took time, but we were able to have that relational balance. And that came through systemic awareness, being able to understand how to connect with people, how to communicate with people, and utilize that knowledge to uh, look at, I guess you could call it experiential learning. I think that's a very key thing for our for our people, and looking at those areas of systemic awareness. Indigenous approach to education. These are some of the areas that we've looked at. I like to look at over the course of time here, looking at the whole child development, not just looking at compartmentalized development. Sometimes that's what you get within our current educational system. Trying to make sure that we're doing a stronger focus on experiential learning, looking at place-based grounding. There's within that structure, what I see and what I've observed over time is that the relationship between the instructor and the student, it definitely has a different interaction in a style in terms of exchange and learning. Yes, of course, there is knowledge gained through that interaction, but I believe and I have observed that when you do have this indigenous approach to education, there's a stronger symbiotic interaction. And I'm sure you've heard that term symbiotic, where it's a relational thing. And what you see somewhat of that exchange in the current educational settings, but with there's clear information passage from teacher to pupil, but there's also in my observation, there's a higher expectation for not only that integration of knowledge, but also the demonstration of metacognition, or the way that they think, and then a demonstration of original thought. The indigenous approach wants you to take that knowledge and develop new ways of thinking, new insight, or how to use it, how to put it into action. And so that's where I'm talking about experiential learning, and then being able to apply it to the real world. And that's something that I remember going through this district and thinking several times in certain classes, why do I have to take this? What is this? What does this mean? And I'm sure you could say the same thing. And so the indigenous approach to education that we try to do, not just in it's difficult to get these into the core subjects because of the strong connection and the strong urgency for testing, state assessments, and that type of thing. But you can get it in there in certain ways. It's always a matter of trying your best to figure out where exactly to do it and how to approach it. It's kind of like I feel sometimes like I'm a salesman at times, and so when I see an opportunity, I go and try to put that bug in the ear, so to speak, of those principals or those teachers, and try to talk to them. It varies. It's something that there are times where it works well, and then there are times where it doesn't. And so where we are able to make the most ground in that particular area in terms of moving CRI into the student's experience is within some of the elements and the programs that we have. Just one example, we have a dance troupe that we started back in 2005, and that has continued to grow over the years. The way that works, basically, we have our group of students, and they're able to present our dances, our Southern Plains style dances, to other schools, to other places, to conferences, wherever we're asked. But we've primarily, especially since the pandemic, they've primarily been presenting here at our schools. And so that we're able to share with some of our own students who may or may not have grown up with these connections. They're able to share, and we've seen some of those interests to come to develop and grow over time. And so it's more than just going through the experience of the performances, but you're gaining real world experience of dance, songs, stories, life lessons, and you're interacting with people. You're interacting with our elders, with our singers, our guest speakers. And so, over the course of time, we've had a lot of students go through that program, as you can imagine, since 2005. So now our we're starting to see children of the original group that were, started with the dance troupe. Now they're coming in and being active. And if I stay here long enough, I may see grandchildren, but we will see how that works, how that goes. At some point that will happen. It's just a natural process. But I want to focus on this last part, this agentic tailored learning. And that's one key area that I want you to really look at. And I encourage you to delve deeper into this. I won't go into it because of all the other areas that I want to cover. But I want you to really look at this because in terms of how this looks, this is where the student takes a stronger role in their learning. And this is not the concept, the traditional concept of the empty vessel being filled by the other, but instead this is where the individual comes with historic knowledge built inside. This is my observation and my belief. Our young people come with a whole host of information that can be tapped, and that our instructors not only can help bring out, but also can learn from that. And so that's something that I want to look at. And in terms of in the context of historical trauma or trauma in general, we're even learning that yes, those things do come from the students come with those experiences, and we're learning through the concept of epigenetics that trauma is passed down from one generation to the next. And so understanding that, how that comes through the DNA, and I wasn't fully aware of that until recently. A Kiowa counselor, and he's more than that, but Dr. Daryl Tonemaugh, he was the first one to introduce me to the knowledge of epigenetics and historical trauma and the connections of DNA and the studies of that. And that led me to where one of our model programs that we have, suicide prevention, and it's called the Hope Squad. And we're in the process of rebuilding that. We've had that for 7 years now. And so what that develops, it's a peer-to-peer mentor model. And our students are able to, they develop or they're selected to be part of this Hope Squad. And they are provided training throughout the year. And that's one area where we've had success in providing CRI-based learning for our students, because through the partnership of the founder of Hope Squad, which is based out of Utah, Dr. Greg Hudnall, he allowed us to develop and make some culturally responsive adaptations to their curriculum and their training structure as well. So through the partnership of tribal program directors and staff nearby, through a trainer, the main trainer that we had at the time, we were able to provide some very interesting CRI-based information, CRI-based activities, hands-on activities, and learning experiences for our students. And they were able to gain a cultural knowledge around the ideas of prevention and intervention. And so, I just want to encourage you all to continue to look into those areas where you can. As I said, it's not always easy to do that in terms of where we can do it, or where we can make it happen, because of limitations placed not only by the district, but limitations placed upon us by state legislation, federal legislation, that type of thing. So principles of culturally responsive instruction, these are areas that we're looking at, and I'm going to try to I don't want to go into too much detail. I'll just share a little bit of information about some of these areas. But the first area that I think is very important, and it has been for us, is maintaining a positive perspective on parents and families. So many times, and when I first came to the district, this was something that was it was in a condition where it needed to be changed a bit, and it fluctuates. I'm not saying we're anywhere near what we need to be. There are times where we'll make progress in developing the relationships, the positive relationships between district staff, between parents, and again, that's also varies by individual as well. But the more that we can develop that on a systemic wide basis, in terms of developing positive perspectives on those within those families, because there's so many things that those connect to, in terms of what we were just talking about, in terms of the values, the epistemologies, and the approaches. They make up that systemic structure that we were talking about. It's vital for us. If we don't have those relationships, then it just won't work. And so they have to be high. Communication of high expectations. Over the years, I've always heard the concept of the academic performance gap. This is what we need to focus on. This is what we need to do. But through the help of so many people, key people that came to the district to help us at certain times over the years, through projects that we were in a turnaround program at one time, and through people that came to help us in those areas, I came to understand that high expectations are very important. And the critical gap is the expectation gap. I think that's a far more predictor of student success or failure than some of the others. It's not the only, but it's pretty high. And so I always try to talk to people, and I put it in different, anytime that I'm talking with individuals or some of my special education teachers or whoever that may be, we talk about expectations and the gap in that area, especially if you're talking with someone that's not of our culture. And then learning within the context of the culture. Some of the experiences I can tell you in our high school, we have a Kiowa language class, and that class has been there before I started here. It was originated by a lady named that I won't name her, but you may I think before I started the class or took over and started helping the class continue, it had been in the district for 23 years. And so now we're moving into the 30 plus years of having that class in operation. And so over time we've had the context or the ability to provide the learning with the context of culture, having those student-centered instructional areas, the culturally mediated instruction, being able to reshape the curriculum, especially in that class. But we've also had opportunities in our elementary classes, or in our elementary sites, I should say. Over time, we're in the reboot phase with that as well. But there were times in our elementary sites, we had my own staff, my Title VI JOM staff, were able to provide classes to our students. And we were able to develop it within our specials rotation. So one day, instead of them going to the physical education, PE class, or music, they could go to that culture class. And so we had it rotated to where and this was all students, not just our indigenous students. These were all students, and they were able to go and receive that instruction. And we were able to see some differences there. But again, as I said at the beginning, this is something that's, if you're in it for the long haul, you're going to see fluctuations. You're going to see times where you'll have these elements, and then you're going to see where you don't have it. You're not able to connect with it. And so let's see. Student-centered instructions, culturally mediated instructions. We've had several partners over the projects through different pilot projects that have helped us in so many ways. Like I mentioned before, we have pockets of success, timeframes when these things, when they worked. We had UCLA CREST, we had WestEd, we had the Center on Standards and Assessment and Implementation. And some of those, that's where some of this information is coming from. But, we had a project where we were developing formative assessment structures and components based on some of these elements that I'm talking about. And so it's been very helpful for us to be able to go through these and look at it. And then just the final part of this section is the teacher as facilitator. We were able to do that quite a bit in those elementary classes and in the Kiowa language class. There was a time where I was able to spend most of my days being that instructor. I've always considered myself more of a facilitator, and that's how, as I mentioned before, that's how we should be, because we always wanted our students to look at not just what we were presenting, but we wanted them to be able to look at several areas. For instance, for an example, we have speakers that developed a different orthography, a different way of writing the Kiowa language. So we wanted those students to be able to look at those differences and master those different languages, or the language, the way of writing, the way that those elders said, how they chose to write those down. And so, those are some of the areas that we were able to help our students. Now this was primarily for our advanced classes. And so they had to acquire their basic language skills, they had to do the base knowledge of the history and traditions. And these were by far not comprehensive, because we had limitations of the class time. And so those were areas that we had to work with. Let's see. I'm going to stop here and pause for questions. I did see, I'm looking at the chat, I see 8, but Casey, would you like to read some of those, or is there someone that would just like to ask? Open up and ask now.
Okay, so I don't see any questions at this time. Are there any questions on the stuff that David shared in this first section before we move forward?
Okay,
Okay, well, I don't see any questions at
that's
this
fine.
time.
We can move on, and if something comes up towards the end, we can definitely have a discussion there, because I'm interested in maybe you can hold your discussion or your sharing on possible projects that you have in your area. I'm always open for learning, in terms of learning what's going on in your communities, learning what you're doing. So let's look quickly. I know I'm keeping my eye on the time frame, and I don't want to run us out of time, but I want to leave ample time at the end for us to have discussion if we need to, if you have something, and then we'll go on from there. But I chose this. This is an example from this man. Human learning presupposes a specific social nature and a process by which children grow into the intellectual life of those around them. And I chose this basically because it does connect to the way that we connect to culture, the way that we learn. It is a way of how we we utilize this, as I said before, in that formative assessment program, or that pilot project that we had. What I looked at is definitely how we learn in a systemic process and how we connect to the network around us as an individual. Oh, too far. Excuse me. So looking at some of these areas like instructional strategies, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Cornell Peewawardy, but he has some very interesting work, and I wanted to talk about more along the lines of related to the quote I just gave you from Vygotsky. Some of the questions that he has that Dr. Peewawardy has put forth recently really has made me think in a deeper way. And what I would say that if I get an opportunity, and I hope I do, to present this or other materials related to this, I definitely want to have his information deeper and deeply embedded in this, because as I said before, this is always a work in progress for me. I'm not ever satisfied. I'm not ever thinking that I've made, even though we've made progress in certain areas with CRI in this district, I want to see this grow even more here, but I also want to see it grow in other areas, and I want to help make that happen, however that works. But one question that he was asking Dr. Peabody recently in a presentation I was able to see, is his question was, where are you coming from? And his question was really grounded in, where are you at culturally? And he was really, it made me think, and I hope it does you as well, because this is a pretty personal question. I've thought about it in relation to the individual experiences that you have, your family experiences and community experiences. Like I mentioned before, for us, for the Kiowa people, we have 5 communities. They have similarities and they have differences, but each of them have their own place-based context that you have to factor into this development of yourself as an individual. And so, for myself, I'm from the Redstone community. And then if I know someone from the Hobart community, they have a different way. I work with a man that is from the Hobart community. And there are times where I can see those differences. We're in the same tribe, but you see those differences. And it's interesting to have that, if you're aware of it, to understand that, because it helps you. It will help you as an educator. It will help you when you're wanting to develop these structures for your students, to be able to understand and answer these questions. And so I'm going to say this is an unsolicited, what would you call it? I don't want to call it an advertisement, but support for his work. And if you can get his book, he has a book. It's called Unsettling Settler Colonial Education, the Transformational Indigenous Praxis Model. And I can say that again if you need me to say it again. Unsettling Settler Colonial Education, and then the Transformational Indigenous Praxis Model. And that's Dr. Cornell Peabody. And I'm really impressed with his work. And we're those of us here in this area, he's always around. He's at different programs. He's at our local conferences. He serves as the vice chairman for the Comanche Nation. And so it's always good to have him here, because it's had to have someone of his intellect and the work that he does. It's very, very nice to have someone to be able to talk to and interact with like that. But I always look at, I'm looking definitely at some of the transformational practice, the praxis that he talks about, and higher order thinking. Those are areas that we need to get our students looking in. And it really connects to me to where we're looking at our systems and we're constantly growing, we're constantly evolving into what we can envision. And so, to me, it really connects back to the whole theme of this whole project director meeting, growing in sovereignty. The work that he puts together in terms of levels of critical thinking development, how that works within different levels of contributions, additive approaches, transformation approaches, and then cultural and social justice action approaches. It just really works well, and I'm glad to be able to share that information with you, and I hope that you will find that book. So some of these strategies you can tell and you can see that we all use these. I can tell you that making sure that you're connecting those students with the storytelling, but making sure that the perspectives and the strengths, the system thinking is part of the follow-up is important. The storytelling is important, but having them understand those concepts and also how that can be connected through modeling and demonstration. I'll share one experience I had recently, and I saw, I believe her daughter is on this in this group, unless she left. But we have an elder here. Her name is Dorothy DeLon, and she's so helpful. She's so faithful in coming and helping our program, helping our students, helping our Kiowa uh, teachers, the teachers in training. She's always so helpful. And I can tell you one experience I had in hearing a story she shared, and it was so it really impacted. It was an impactful story for me to hear, and it was a story about the Tonkawa Hills incident. That's here. It's a local incident, and I don't know if you've heard of it, but it shares the story, and I won't go into the full story, but basically there was a group of boys, local boys, and they were kidnapped, and there was something that happened. I won't tell the details of it, but it was a gruesome thing that happened, and the boys were basically murdered, and by this other tribal group. Well, a collective group of our warriors here at the time, made up of Kiowa, Caddo, a couple of other tribes. They tracked those men down over, east of our community here, and brought them back. And I won't tell you all the rest of the story, but just to hear that story change, it just, and I had been here and all of these years, but I can tell you the connection that I felt. It was so strong. And so it really, even, and what it did, because I was in the process of developing some of these pilot projects, and we were working with all of this, it just clicked for me. And I realized that we really need these elements here for instructional strategies, instructional activities, and that type of thing. Um, Let me go on to activities, real world context. That's the main area that I want to focus on. Place-based local project assignments, hands-on activities, as I've mentioned before. Those are key elements that we need to have put in place. If we don't have those, then it's just difficult for our students to learn in the right way, especially our kids. Now, some of your programs, where you're at, it may be different. I'm just saying this is what has worked for us, worked for our students. We see a difference. We can see it in our classes that we're able to provide. We can see it even in some of the core classes that we're able to do some type of smaller pilot phases or that type of thing. So looking at the norms, being able to, definitely look at the individual student. This is something that I always try to stress with staff, individuals that I'm talking to, and trying to present at different times. Over the years, there are times where I'm able to present to our overall district population, district staff during beginning of the year staff training, or I'm invited to site trainings, or it just varies. And so I always try to stress this. This is always a part of my presentation, and it's a part of my discussion. If I have individual discussions with our counselors, with uh, our special ed teachers, gen ed teachers, if I happen to be in a situation where I need to talk about that, talk about cultural norms, and then again, the high expectations, having that positive demeanor in that type of area. And these are some of the areas of teacher attitudes that are needed. And again, these are not uh, something that you would, this is just a given. This should be there, and it usually is for the most part. It's there, but we have high turnover here in our area, just for various reasons. So there's always a constant process of trying to change some of the mindset, some of the miscommunication, misunderstanding that people have, not only about our tribes, or our individual students, but overcoming the the I guess you could say the way people think about our community, or the things that are out there. And again, high expectations. That's something that I'm going to always talk about. The main area that I'm going to talk about here is looking at that last bullet point, in terms of Indigenous students who dropped out of school. One thing that they always say is that the teachers didn't care about them. And so, one of the things that we always try to talk, and our current superintendent talks about this a lot in terms when he addresses our teachers. They won't necessarily care what you've taught them. They don't care how much you know. They don't care how much influence you have, or whatever that may be, but they will care, and they will know when you care about them. And that's something I can still tell you. I can name off teachers that cared for me, and I still, I still appreciate them. And then I can tell you about a teacher that made me sick all year with anxiety, because I was so afraid she was going to do to me what I saw her do to my friend. And that was something that it was traumatizing for sure. And that's something that we always try to look at. Okay, before we move into the last section, I want to pause again. Does anybody have any questions? If not, I also, if you do have any other resources like what Dr. Peawardy's work is, if you'd like to share that, I would ask that you'd share that in the chat, because I'm always looking for new resources. I'm always looking for new things. And if there's something that's really working well in your area, I'd like to know about it, because as I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just a practitioner. I'm always out here trying to learn more. And so the more I can learn from you, the better. So take a minute or two. If you can share something, if you want to share it verbally, or if you just want to put it in the chat, that's great. And then we'll move on, because I know let's see, we have until 2:30 if I remember right. So we still have a little bit of time, but I don't want to take the whole time for sure.
There's a few thank yous in the chat. And then let's see anything else. Yes, for Nuka's side, the Maya Angelou quote, people will never forget how you made them feel. Definitely, I feel like connects some of the things that were shared. And then we do have a question. What are some strategies you use to talk to teachers?
Strategies to talk to the teachers. And I guess in the context, I guess that could be a certain context. There are times where I connect with them individually. And it could also be in the context of what I'm talking to them about. If it's an issue, or if it's just something that I'm wanting to clarify with them, I will send an email first, set up a meeting, and I go and talk to them. One good thing about growing up here, and I know quite a few of the teachers that have been here for a while for sure, but the new teachers, I make sure that I go in with an approach of trying to understand them, and I don't assume that they're purposefully doing some of the things that I've heard about. I always try to assume that it's based on them not understanding. And so we have a conversation, and usually there's it works out well. I try to not come at it in a confrontational way. I come at it from questions, and I try to ask them questions. And a lot of times, it's not confrontational at all, because of the way, let me back up. When I send the email, I usually start with some of those questions, and I'll ask them, for instance, I heard of this potential issue. I had a parent call. Can we meet? These are some of the areas that were mentioned, and I have some strategies possibly that could work. Let's talk. And I would say the majority of the time, 90% of the time, they're open to that, and at least with a couple of strategies that I provide in terms of how to connect with those with the parents. And some of it is based on what I was just sharing earlier. just some of these, looking at potential ways to connect with the family, connect um, with the culture and the knowledge. Some are open to that and some are not. It just depends.
Okay, so we have two more questions and then we'll move to the next session. So we have time for questions at the end as well.
Okay.
Um, is there a pre-service training that teachers go through to educate them about your community?
There is somewhat of a pre-service training. We do have, especially when we have our new teachers, we have a 2 day, well, actually it's a 3 day session to where we bring them in before the regular professional development session and we talk to them. They are allowed to, I meet with them when we're in a collective group. We talk to them, share with them about the community. Our superintendent talks to them, and over the course of time, he's been, I think it's been 7 years, and so he's really developed a connection with the community. I mean, that varies, it always will with certain people, certain individuals. Some people will say, "Oh no, that's not true." But I see otherwise because I work with them daily and I work with our other folks daily. And you're going to always have differences of opinion, but during that process of time, they are provided on-site training, in terms of various aspects of what that will look like, how that looks like with our community. And usually those are provided by veteran teachers or people that have been uh, chosen for their success in our community, for working with our diverse student population and families. Most of them that we have working with them, they've grown up here. They're not all. They're some of them. Sometimes they're native or indigenous, but they're not always. And then one other aspect that we have that has been very helpful, I think, in that capacity is the connection with our Spark Wheel program. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the staff and the connections that we have, as I said, that grew from a project that we had. It was a project that was an OIE grant originally, and it was in partnership with the national, excuse me, the National Indian Education Association, the Wichita Tribe, and the Community and Schools of Mid-America. And so we were able to develop this program. And so we have our CIS, now they're called Spark Wheel, student support people, and they provide so many aspects that enhance and support our what our JOM and Title VI people provide, and in our community programs as well. So we have several layers of interaction to where some of our new people are able to get some an element or a measure of support and understanding.
Great, thank you. And then the other question is if you could offer one piece of advice to teacher candidates, what would it be?
If I could add one piece of advice for teacher candidates, is that what you said? I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Well, how about I just move into this next section and I'll answer that question.
Perfect. Great segue, Shannon.
Because that's what exactly we're talking. We're going to talk about action steps and some of those areas that you can do in terms of looking at how you can develop and look at just looking at this area of fostering cultural competence. So let's look at this quote here that I pulled from the NEA. Cultural competence is having an awareness of one's own cultural identity and views about difference and the ability to learn and build on the varying cultural and community norms of students and their families. And so I think that's very important. You can see this first step is self-assessment and being able to truly look at yourself, looking at different things as a teacher candidate, being able to look at different things that you bring to this, to what you're planning to do with your students, what you're planning to do with your career, how you want to grow and develop as a teacher. How does culture influence your attitudes and beliefs? These are questions you can ask yourself. You know, how do these influence teaching practices and related practices at your school? And what do you know about students' cultural attitudes and beliefs? One of the other areas that I look at, and I do this for myself as well, is looking at privilege. How do we own our privilege? And it doesn't matter to me what culture you're in. You're going to have a level or a measure of privilege that you operate in. Over the course of time, there was a time where I considered, that this was only a certain group, a certain group of people that had this privilege. And there was, in that sense, in those historical contexts and current, it still exists. I know that, but I also know that there's more complexity to it now. And so my perception of it, that it's evolved and it's just become a little more sophisticated, I guess you could say, in terms of how I look at that. So I would encourage you to not only look at these questions, but look at yourself, whether you're an indigenous teacher or candidate, or whether you're a non-indigenous teacher candidate, whatever culture you come from, you're going to have some of these elements that you need to look at and be able to really get truly deeply into those elements to understand what what does what influences you. How does this come out into your attitudes and beliefs? How are you going to be able to make it through that long school year and go through day by day by day? Because these jobs are not easy, and especially those teaching positions, as some of you know, or as some of you will find out if you're a candidate, that they are not easy, and they can become even a little more difficult when you have students that need you more. Because of whatever reason, they need more from you. And so you need to be able to dig deep to be able to provide that, or you may or may not make it. You may need to be able to understand those elements there. So that's one area. Number two is an inventory of knowledge of indigenous culture. And this would be really more towards the local context of where you're at, where you land as a teacher candidate. You can't necessarily do this yet until you are actually in that community, until you're able to get those characteristics of that local culture and those traditions. In our case, uh, looking at local tribal communities in our area, you're looking at a very diverse group of tribal communities. You're not talking about one or two, you're talking about 7 to 9 in the area. But because of certain situations in our community, we have anywhere from 37 to 40, and this is not just in Anadarko. A lot of our metro schools have this or more tribal diversity because of how our students move and are highly mobile. But you're going to have so many tribes, and in our area we do, because we have Riverside Indian School, we have the BIA, we have the agency, we have the Indian Health Services. And so those various organizations bring in people from out of state, bring in tribal students from Mississippi, from Montana, and some of those students meet a local and stay. So we end up having students that they're enrolled in tribes in Montana and all over. So having those that cultural literacy is important to understand. History of indigenous education policies and practice, history of local tribes. Those are some of the things that you can look at in terms of preparation, especially once you know where you're going to be, and if you're going to be working with students of indigenous populations. And then you can get down to the individual student, because you can go general, but you can also look into the student. Just for myself, you can say, yes, the David is Kiowa, but he's not from the Hobart community. He's from the Redstone community. So you want to know what that means. What are the ways of knowing from the Redstone community? And that's going to be up to you. And you may not be able to even access some of this information, but you might over time. It just depends on what how far you're willing to go and if you're able to do it. I understand the process of time and how it works, especially in a school year. And you can have meaning intention, so many intentional things you want to do, but I would encourage you to work on that, work on a plan to make it where you can be consistent and intentional in terms of investigating those communities, investigating the ways that they solve problems, nonverbal communication. It's funny. I know some of you probably have some of these as well, but for us around here, we point with our lips. And it's funny for me when I go somewhere else, I automatically do that, and people look at me like, "What is wrong with you? You know, why are you?" They think I'm giving them the duck lips or something, but I'm not. I'm pointing, and so I have to always be considerate of those differences. And then just some of the other areas. Just looking at the time, I'm going to speed up a little bit. And then just based on those evidences, if you're able to look at uh, some of those knowledges, if you allow your students to share knowledge, you can develop that into how you design and put your instruction in place. You can invite some of those community members to come in and share. Journaling could be a process that you could utilize with your students. They can share. Some of them may not know it, but that could be an opportunity for them to connect, like I was saying before, to go back and connect to those experiences from their people and pull that into their current learning state, their current learning environment. And it's going to change so much. And I know that it did it for me, and I know that it does it for our students here as well. And let's see, I've talked about the last two bullets quite a bit as well. And some of these are some of the last, there's some of these steps: reflect and repeat, being able to go into, ongoing inquiry and revision, looking at those perspectives, looking at cultural knowledge, appropriate approaches, knowledge, impact, role of students. Moving forward, learning goals, how you can help them show progress, how you can move them into deeper ways of learning. Those are things that are very important as you move forward in terms of developing this cultural literacy. Not just include Indigenous, but include all ways. That's one element that I didn't really get to, and I won't go into it in detail, but I really want my students here to be globally competent. And so I'm always looking for ways to, whether it's projects or some ways where we can bring people in or connect them to other programs or other cultures. We've had a partnership with a South Korean group for several years now, and we're working with them. We're going to have them come in this summer and provide some various learning strategies, some culture, not just in some of the things that they provide in terms of language, but their food and some of the things, and we'll share with them. And it's a great cultural exchange, and we are always looking for new opportunities for that. And so I will say, as you read that slide, that practice there in terms of CRI, one things that I just recently had the opportunity to go through is a 2-day meeting at the First Americans Museum here in Oklahoma City, nearby. It's just a 45-minute drive from here, 50-minute drive. And one of the things that we're working on, I was invited to be a part of this group. And so this group is developing a collective of existing curriculum that tribal departments and other related organizations are working on. And so in the next few years, it's going to be an online collection. And so in the next few years, this is going to be gathered, marketed, and shared, and allowed and made available to instructional gen ed teachers across the state. And the plan is to make this, of course, it will be available to other states. So, we're looking at strategies to connect it to, if it's a tribe that they're in Oklahoma, but they originated in Ohio or in Pennsylvania, then we're going to try and make sure that we connect those, the learning strategies and connect those standards that the state has so that those are available and that it provides, curriculum and lesson plans that these teachers can take, because that's a big obstacle to be able to, we have a lot of teachers that they want to provide this CRI, but there's just nothing out there, or it is out there, but it's not available, or they don't know about it. There's a whole host of things, or they're not comfortable with taking it and adapting it. And so that's what I'm excited to see what will develop in the next few years to see, what we can do with that, how we can make that available. And, maybe it can just be one of many. I'm sure there are other programs and other places that are developing similar things. And if we can network all of those things, I think we're going to start seeing more CRI growing in our educational classrooms over the course of time. So I'm going to stop there. I think we have a few more minutes left, around 4 minutes. And so if there are any other questions, I know my email is listed there, so you can always email me. I can share with you more. If there's something that I talked about that you want to get more detail on, feel free to email me. I'll be glad to answer anything or provide what I can. If I can't find it, I will look for people to help you. And I really appreciate you spending time with me today, allowing me to share just a little bit of what I get to do every day, what helps me enjoy life and get up and get to help our young people grow and enjoy their life. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, so we do have one question and then a comment as well. Lots of thank yous, of course. So for the question, does your school district have do you divide students in some way like MTSS? And how would you encourage cultural responsiveness with those kind of division or some people, I'm trying to think of the other word that people
Could you
use.
say that one part again, that
Like
divide
with
them up into?
so like with dividing student like tracking systems for students essentially like MTSS
Oh
or
yeah.
other things
Okay.
where
I
you
thought
tier
that's what you said,
students.
but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
We have an emerging system. There was a time where we had more of a manual tracking system. We were part of a turnaround program at one time, and so we had a manual system. It was called a data wall, and we had students up on the wall, and we would have them show progress and everything. Now we use a program called NWEA, and so that's how we provide our benchmark testing for every student. We provide that 3 times a year at the beginning, middle, and right before the state testing takes place. And so that's how we work with our students and help in progress monitoring. We still have, I think, in our current setting, we have some improvement to make, and I'm working on that, especially in the area of our special education program. We're embarking on a whole host of new training and new development in that area. And one of the things that's coming down the pike for us, we're in a pilot program that we signed up for with the Oklahoma State Department of Education, to where we will have a MTSS system placed into our special education program. It's called EdPlan, and so that will provide us with an opportunity for all of our gen ed teachers, our sped teachers, to be able to develop interventions, to be able to group students and develop individual plans for a group or however that works. And so I'm looking forward to getting that in place. We're still in the beginning stages of putting that in place. And so we definitely will have that. And I'm looking forward to that because it basically will take what we used to have on the wall into our data system. And so it will pull in all the information from our student information system called, we use PowerSchool here. It will pull in data from NWEA and other sections, so that we'll have basically our data wall will be there, and we'll be able to see attendance issues, behavioral issues, and it basically we use the same thing: red, green, and yellow stop signs. So if the student's okay, then they're in the green. If not, then they're in yellow or red. And so that's what we're going to be able to use. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions. Someone did recommend Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond, which is a great text. And then lots of thank yous. Other than that, I don't see any other questions. So thank you, David, for your knowledge and your sharing and being willing to spend this time with us today. We are very grateful. So Wado to you, thank you. And Wado to everyone else, thank you for joining. Really glad that you guys enjoyed it and got something out of it for sure. And then what's next for us conference-wise is going to be instant networking, starts in about 10 minutes. And so you can take that time to chat on the discussion board, download files from the resource library, take part in the instant networking platform. And if you have any questions or follow-up, you can reach out to us at oie@sceiservices.com. You will have to go into the platform and do the survey for this presentation. So if you could please make sure that you go in there and do the survey like you have for the other sessions, we would greatly appreciate that. You should see a survey button at the bottom where you also see resources, which is where you can find the slides for this presentation as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope you continue to enjoy the sessions and the roundtables.